The silence in the Atlanta courtroom was broken when Tiana Washington, just 10 years old, stood up from her chair and asked permission to speak. The girl held a makeshift folder full of papers and notes, her determined eyes contrasting with her small stature before the imposing court. "Your Honor, I would like to make a statement in defense of my grandfather," said the girl in a firm voice that echoed through the silent room. Judge Robert Keller stopped writing and looked up over his glasses. In his 25-year career, he had never witnessed anything like this. At the jury table, some members looked at each other with expressions ranging from curiosity to obvious discomfort. Harold Washington, 75, was accused of misappropriating funds from the Oakwood Neighborhood Housing Program. The amount was considerable, $195,000, which had simply disappeared from the coffers of the community organization he had run for 18 years. "Young lady, you should be in school," said the judge with a forced half-smile, trying to be kind in the unusual situation. "I know, sir, but my grandfather has heart problems and can't get upset. His lawyer dropped the case yesterday because he found out he wasn't going to get paid," Tiana replied, her voice echoing a maturity disturbing for her age. A murmur spread through the room. Bradley Thompson, the prosecutor in charge of the case, rolled his eyes in obvious irritation. He was an elegant white man in his 40s, known for his 97% conviction rate in cases involving financial fraud. "Your Honor, this is a complete irregularity. A child cannot represent anyone in court," Thompson protested, adjusting his expensive tie with ill-concealed disdain. "I don't want to represent anyone, sir," Tiana replied, turning to the prosecutor with impressive politeness. "I just want to tell the truth. My grandfather taught me that the truth always wins, even when it seems impossible." Judge Keller leaned forward, intrigued. There was something about the girl's determination that touched him deeply, but also an uncomfortable awareness that all eyes in the room were watching a black child trying to navigate a system that, in this particular Atlanta district, was predominantly led by white officials who had long held their positions of power. "Tiana, you have 5 minutes to speak, but only as a witness," the judge ruled, ignoring Thompson's silent protest. Tiana took a deep breath and opened her folder. The papers were organized with a precision that caught the attention of everyone present. There were newspaper clippings, photocopies of official documents, and even drawings made by the girl herself to illustrate important points. "Your Honor, I've lived with my grandfather since my parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. He has always been the administrator of the housing program, and I always helped him check the bills every Sunday night at the kitchen table." Thompson prepared to object again, but something in the girl's determined gaze made him hesitate. It was as if this child knew exactly what she was doing. "Every Sunday, Grandpa Harold would spread all the papers on the table and let me sort the receipts by color: green for expenses, pink for income. It was our special time together," Tiana continued, her voice beginning to tremble slightly, but she quickly regained her composure as everyone in the courtroom watched with a mixture of condescension and curiosity. Thompson couldn't hide his contempt. To him, the scene was a pathetic waste of time. A black child trying to save a corrupt old man with cheap emotional theater. In August, 4 weeks before the money went missing, Grandpa Harold noticed that someone had been tampering with his housing program account without authorization. Tiana continued, showing a plain school notebook. "He wrote everything down here." The prosecutor stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We are wasting time with the fantasies of a child who has clearly been coached by the defendant himself." "Mr. Thompson, you can speak later if you wish," Tiana replied with a politeness that surprised some of the jurors. "My grandfather always taught me to let people finish speaking." The truth was more complex than anyone in the room imagined. Harold Washington had dedicated 18 years of his life to the housing program that helped low-income families find decent housing in Atlanta. He worked for minimal pay, driven only by the conviction that every child deserved a safe home. 3 years earlier, when Tiana lost her parents in a devastating car accident, Harold did not hesitate to take custody of his granddaughter. The girl arrived traumatized, blaming herself for her parents' death. They were returning from her piano recital when they were struck by a drunk driver. For months, Tiana refused to speak. Harold spent entire nights sitting by her bed, reading aloud court cases and legal documents he brought home from his volunteer work helping neighbors with bureaucratic issues. "My little sunshine," he would say, "knowledge is the only thing no one can take away from us. When you know how the world works, you'll never feel small in front of anyone again." Tiana became interested in the papers, asking questions about legal terms and procedures. Harold discovered that the girl had an impressive memory and a natural ability to understand legal logic that surprised even the lawyer he knew. "Your Honor, may I show you what we found?" Tiana asked, returning to the present. Thompson snorted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your Excellency, this is a circus. What credibility can a child have in complex financial matters?" "A lot more than you think," Tiana replied, looking directly at the prosecutor. "Especially when that child learned to read legal documents at the age of 7 because it was the only way she could connect with her grandfather after losing her parents." An awkward silence filled the room. Even Thompson seemed momentarily taken aback by the mature response and personal revelation. Tiana approached the judge's bench with a confidence that contrasted dramatically with her age. "Look, on August 15th, $3,200 was withdrawn from the account for emergency plumbing repairs at the community center. But my grandfather took me there the next day, and the plumbing was in terrible condition." She showed a photo taken with an old cell phone. This photo was taken on August 16th. As you can see, there are clear signs of leaking pipes and no evidence of recent repairs. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had built his entire case on Harold's technical responsibility as administrator, but he hadn't investigated each individual transaction thoroughly. "On August 22nd, Tiana continued, another $2,400 for security equipment, but there was never any new equipment at the center. And on August 29th, the withdrawal that caught our attention the most, $4,100 for outside legal counsel." Tiana paused dramatically, her eyes sweeping the room. "But Grandpa Harold never hired any outside lawyers. He always handled legal matters himself with the help of lawyer friends who worked pro bono." The people in the jury box began to lean forward, paying closer attention. What had started as curiosity was turning into something much more serious. "Mr. Thompson," Tiana said, turning to the prosecutor, "did you verify that these companies that received the payments actually exist?" Thompson hesitated. It was a simple question, but he hadn't done this basic verification. The investigation focused on the administrator's responsibility. "I see," Tiana said with a maturity that was disturbing. "So you assumed that Grandpa Harold was guilty without investigating who actually stole the money?" Each new question from Tiana revealed glaring gaps in Thompson's investigation. The prosecutor was beginning to realize that he had completely underestimated the situation, building a superficial case based on prejudices about an elderly black man managing public funds in a predominantly white district. But what Thompson didn't know was that every strategic question Tiana asked wasn't the result of luck or childish intuition. For months, the girl had meticulously studied every aspect of the case with a determination fueled not only by her love for her grandfather, but by the absolute certainty that the system would try to destroy yet another innocent black family. "There's something strange about these transactions," Tiana continued, pulling another envelope from the folder. "They were all signed by Grandpa Harold, but he never signed any of these." Tiana showed several sheets comparing signatures. I learned about handwriting analysis at the public library. Even a kid like me can see they're different. Look, Grandpa's real signature has sharper strokes, and these are done with really light pressure. Thompson rolled his eyes dramatically. Now we're going to accept handwriting analysis done by a child. That's absolutely ridiculous. Mr. Thompson, Tiana replied with impressive politeness, do you have any professional handwriting analysis to prove that these signatures are genuine? The prosecutor hesitated. This was another basic check he hadn't done. I see, Tiana said. So you have no proof that Grandpa Harold actually signed these documents? As Thompson struggled to formulate a response, Tiana continued with a confidence that left everyone stunned. For the past 2 months since she had learned of the charges, the girl had turned her nights into intensive study sessions. The truth was that Tiana wasn't doing it alone. Ms. Eleanor Jenkins, a retired librarian and former paralegal, had become her secret mentor. Eleanor had worked for 35 years in law firms and immediately recognized the girl's potential when she showed up at the library asking for books on legal procedure. But the most important discovery is here, Tiana said, pulling out an official document. This is a report from the bank showing that on the day the money disappeared, someone accessed the account at 3:45 p.m. The transaction lasted 20 minutes. Tiana showed another piece of paper, and this is the medical record from Atlanta Memorial Hospital proving that at that exact time, Grandpa Harold was with me in the emergency room. I was having a severe asthma attack, and he was there from 2 to 6 p.m. A murmur ran through the room. It was the first concrete and irrefutable evidence that Harold could not have made the transaction. Thompson stood up nervously. Your Honor, these documents were not presented during the discovery phase. Mr. Thompson, Tiana replied, did you present any evidence proving that Grandpa Harold was present when the money was stolen? Another awkward silence. Thompson had built his entire case on Harold's technical responsibility without ever verifying that he was physically present at the time of the crime. Furthermore, Tiana continued, did you check the security cameras in the building where the housing program office is located? Thompson was starting to sweat. The cameras weren't working that day. Interesting, Tiana said with calculated innocence. Because I called the security company last week and they told me the cameras were working perfectly. They even offered to give me the recordings for free to help Grandpa Harold. The room erupted in murmurs. Thompson realized he was being systematically dismantled by a 10-year-old who had done basic investigative work he had neglected. How did you get this information? Thompson asked, his voice betraying a mixture of anger and desperation. It's simple, Tiana replied. When you love someone, you do whatever it takes to protect them. I've spent the last 2 months studying this case every day after school. Harold, who had remained silent until then, began to cry quietly. His 10-year-old granddaughter was fighting for him with a determination and intelligence he had never imagined possible. Judge Keller leaned forward, clearly impressed. Tiana, how did you learn to organize evidence like this? Ms. Eleanor from the library helped me. She worked in law offices for 35 years and said that everyone deserves a fair defense even when they can't afford one. Thompson realized he had completely underestimated the situation. This wasn't just a desperate child trying to save her grandfather. It was a strategic duo that had investigated the case more thoroughly than his own team. But I have one last piece of evidence, Tiana said, her voice growing more serious. The most important one of all. She took a sealed envelope from her briefcase. Inside this envelope is proof of who really stole the money from the housing program. Grandpa Harold and I discovered the truth, but we wanted to give the real culprit a chance to confess first. Tiana looked directly at Thompson. Mr. Thompson, would you like to withdraw the charges against Grandpa Harold before I open this envelope? Thompson hesitated. He had built his career on the conviction that he was always right, but now he faced the possibility that he had accused an innocent man based on prejudice and negligent investigation. Thompson hesitated, sweat beginning to form beads on his forehead. I can't drop charges based on blackmail from a child. Tiana calmly opened the envelope and removed a digital recording. Mr. Thompson, do you remember this phone conversation from August 20th? She pressed play. Thompson's unmistakable voice echoed through the room. Nathan, I need you to speed up this case with the old black man from Oakwood. It doesn't matter if he's guilty or not. My conviction rate can't drop before the district attorney's election. A deafening silence fell over the courtroom. Another man's voice answered on the recording. Brad, are you sure? What if they find out we didn't investigate properly? Who's going to find out? It's just another black man against me. The jury in this district is already decided before they even walk in the room. The faces on the jury contorted in expressions of shock and revulsion. Thompson turned pale, realizing that his career had just been publicly destroyed. This is inadmissible, Thompson shouted, standing up abruptly. That recording was obtained illegally. Actually, Tiana said with impressive calm, it was obtained legally. Ms. Eleanor taught me about recording laws. This conversation took place on the public office phone, which has clear notices about recording for transparency purposes. Judge Keller was visibly shaken. In his 2 decades on the bench, he had never witnessed such an exposure of procedural misconduct. Tiana continued, Mr. Thompson, do you also remember this message you sent to Nathan 3 days later? She showed a printout of the text. The investigation needs to focus solely on the administrator's responsibility. I don't want any detectives wasting time checking companies or signatures. Case closed in 2 weeks maximum. But the most important evidence, said Tiana, is in this document. She showed a bank statement. This is Mr. Thompson's personal account statement. On September 5th, 3 days after Grandpa Harold was charged, he received a deposit of $30,000 from a shell company. Thompson tried to speak, but his voice came out as a desperate whisper. That's the same company that received some of the fraudulent payments from the housing program. Tiana added, You weren't just neglecting the investigation, Mr. Thompson. You were protecting your accomplices. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Thompson had fallen into his own trap. Not only had he accused an innocent man, but he was directly involved in the corruption scheme. Ms. Eleanor taught me something important, Tiana said, looking directly at Thompson. She said that people like you always make the same mistake. You think you can step on those you consider weaker without consequences. Harold, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, slowly stood up. Mr. Thompson, for 18 years, I have dedicated my life to helping families find decent housing. You tried to destroy that for money and political ambition. Thompson hung his head, completely defeated. His reputation, career, and political future had been obliterated by a 10-year-old he had completely underestimated. Tiana, Judge Keller said, his voice shaking with emotion. In my 25 years on the bench, I have never seen a presentation of evidence as thorough as yours. Thank you, Your Honor, but I just wanted to clear Grandpa Harold's name and ensure that true justice was served. The judge turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Thompson, in addition to the charges against Harold Washington being immediately dismissed, I am ordering that this case be referred for investigation of prosecutorial misconduct and corruption. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Several jurors had tears in their eyes, not only for Harold's proven innocence, but for the powerful demonstration that intelligence and determination can overcome prejudice and corruption. 6 months after the trial that changed Atlanta, Tiana was sitting in the front row of the city's law school, not as a student but as a guest speaker. At age 10, she had become the most famous civil procedure case study of the past decade. True justice, Tiana told an audience of 250 future lawyers, doesn't happen when you defeat someone. It happens when you protect those you love and teach others to do the same. In the front row, Harold smiled proudly. His health had improved dramatically since the stress of the charges ended. The housing program, now under new transparent management, had received record donations from people inspired by the Washington family's story of integrity. Thompson, on the other hand, faced a very different reality. After a federal investigation, he had been convicted of corruption, prosecutorial misconduct, and fraud. He lost his license to practice law, faced 3 years in prison, and now worked as a retail clerk in a small town where no one knew of his shameful past. The case had inspired significant legislative changes. A bill known as the Tiana Law was passed in Georgia, requiring prosecutors to present concrete evidence of the defendant's physical presence at the time of the crime in cases of grand larceny. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity has touched your heart, subscribe to Tribe of Justice channel to discover more real stories that prove that the best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, but building something so great that they could never imagine. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against a system that seemed impossible to beat? Leave your own story of determination in the comments, because as Tiana taught us, every child and every adult has more power than they realize when they decide that justice is worth fighting for.